Hello everyone, I'm Oliver, the Chief Product Officer here at Natural Capital Partners, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining today's webinar, where you're going to be learning about a unique opportunity to invest in forest ecosystem services. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Chris Henschel. Chris manages the Ecosystem Services Program at the Forest Stewardship Council and has 20 years experience in providing tools and strategies for forest conservation and management around the world. Chris is leading the FSC's work to create new incentives for the preservation of valuable ecosystem services in responsibly managed forests. So today's webinar is scheduled to last for 30 minutes, and we plan to leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end for your questions. You are all currently in a listen-only mode, so please use the panel on the right-hand side of the screen to submit any questions that you have, and we'll take the time to go through those at the end. But before we start, we'd like to run a quick audience poll just to gauge your interest and engagement with forestry and ecosystem services. And that poll will be coming up on screen. So our question is, how important to your organization is information about verified impacts on forest ecosystem services? And we would like you to select between very important, important, of marginal importance, or you're not yet sure. And I'll just give you a moment or two to respond to that poll. Fantastic. So if we close that poll, we will reveal that the vast majority of you are placing great importance on it. So that is fantastic. Now, before we start, I'd like to run through a bit of our history with forests and the ecosystem services that they provide. As Future Forests, back in 1997, we started planting trees for citizens and developing forests for companies to offset their carbon emissions, because we and our customers recognized that tree planting and forests were symbols of positive action on climate. And by 2005, as the carbon neutral company, facilitated by the development of project standards, we evolved to offer what we considered charismatic carbon projects because they offered wider benefits beyond a simple carbon saving. These projects, based in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, weren't just in land use and forestry, but across all renewable energies and efficient household devices such as cook stoves and water filters. We also established the Carbon Neutral Protocol, which became the global standard for companies looking to reduce their emissions to net zero. And today, as Natural Capital Partners, we support businesses embracing market-based instruments to deliver a very broad range of their sustainability objectives. We've found the infrastructure of results-based finance is evolving to evidence progress towards the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And the project standards continue to develop new impact metrics that are relevant to water, health, gender, biodiversity, and ecosystem services, which is obviously the challenge that FSC are solving for. And we have relied on standards throughout our evolution from Future Forests to Natural Capital Partners, and we believe they play a fundamental role in the market for environmental instruments and for verified outcomes. We see a diversity of standards as helpful when those standards are pioneering in new and in difficult areas, such as the highly contextual nature of biodiversity and forest ecosystems. We like to support standards that bring pragmatic innovations to market that are actionable for our clients and that enable them to make credible, verified, and transparent claims about their investments in natural capital. And FSC is doing this. We think the value of their new standard in the making is that it draws on FSC's deep origins and understanding of forest ecosystems, which means they can address the highly contextual nature of project impacts. We appreciate their stakeholder-led development process, their third-party independence and commitment to accurate reporting, and attribute accounting. Over the past 20 years, Natural Capital Partners has worked with over 300 projects to connect businesses with the positive impact that those projects deliver. Figuring out new ways to connect and new ways to describe project impacts is our core business, and convening this webinar is part of that development process. I want to take the opportunity to highlight 4 of those connections to illustrate how the infrastructure of the carbon markets and results-based finance is being used to deliver a broad range of impacts that businesses are interested in. If we take Sky, the TV network, it's a business that cares deeply about biodiversity protection and has a rich dialogue with their viewers in terms of the content that they're creating and their messaging around biodiversity. Protecting a rainforest through results-based finance allowed Sky to achieve a great alignment between its corporate and consumer programs. Betty's and Taylor's, the tea company, embraced agroforestry and conservation farming to enhance the climate resilience and incomes of their smallholder tea farmers, which in turn enhances the resilience of Taylor's supply chain, which is really powerful. And I'm just back from a project visit with Freshfields to Kenya, and a key driver for them has been about improving the livelihoods of the communities and families that depend on forests and trees for their very survival. And that was also true for Microsoft. So hopefully that illustrates the variety of impacts that businesses are paying for in terms of results-based finance. And we look forward to building more of these connections, which is why we're excited to be collaborating with FSC on ecosystem services to do just that. And so I'd now like to hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Oliver. And thank you everyone for coming to our webinar today to learn about FSC's new ecosystem services claims and how they can create new incentives for responsible forest management and the protection of ecosystem services. I will be profiling 3 of the many sites where we have pilot tested our new ecosystem services procedure during this webinar. We are looking for businesses interested in financially sponsoring the positive impacts on forest carbon storage and biodiversity that have been verified at these sites. We have representatives from each of these sites on the call today, so I'd like to welcome them as well. They will be listening in as participants to the call. Next slide. FSC works to take care of the world's forests for future generations, making sure we all have forests for all, forever. We are a global not-for-profit organization that sets the standards for what is a responsibly managed forest, both environmentally and socially. When timber leaves an FSC-certified forest, we ensure companies along the supply chain also meet our best practice standards, so that when a product bears the FSC logo, you can be sure it's been made from responsible sources. In this way, FSC certification helps forests remain thriving environments for generations to come by helping businesses and consumers make ethical and responsible purchasing decisions. Next slide. Through certification, FSC guarantees that forests and their ecosystem services are responsibly managed. FSC's new ecosystem services procedure will enable verification of specific positive impacts on ecosystem services. This verification gives rise to FSC ecosystem services claims, which forest managers can use to access ecosystem service payments and investments. FSC ecosystem services claims can be used by businesses and governments and investors to demonstrate the impact of their purchases, payments, and investments on preserving ecosystem services. Our new ecosystem services procedure supports the verification of impacts on carbon sequestration and storage, watershed services, biodiversity conservation, soil conservation, and recreational services such as nature-based tourism. The development of FSC's new ecosystem services claims was funded through the Forces project by United Nations Environment with a grant from the Global Environment Facility. Next slide. The ecosystem services procedure can be applied at the same time as an FSC forest management audit to verify specific positive impacts resulting on FSC-certified forest management areas. For example, verified impacts could include the maintenance or restoration of species diversity, carbon sequestration and storage, or water quality. FSC is aiming to have the Ecosystem Services Procedure available for global use in April 2018. Next slide. Impacts verified using the Ecosystem Services Procedure give rise to FSC Ecosystem Services claims. Based on these claims, forest managers will be able to use FSC trademarks to promote verified impacts. Financial sponsors of these impacts will also be able to use FSC trademarks to promote their role in achieving and maintaining them. FSC Ecosystem Services claims may also be used to communicate verified co-benefits of carbon credits from FSC-certified forests. Finally, we are also exploring how verified ecosystem services impacts may support product promotion and on-product labeling. However, we anticipate that product promotion and labeling will not be immediately available when the Ecosystem Services Procedure is approved. Next slide. We have tested the Ecosystem Services Procedure at 13 sites worldwide, resulting in verified ecosystem services claims at 8 sites, covering carbon sequestration and storage, conservation of biodiversity, and watershed services. Consistent with our pilot testing rules at FSC, certification claims from these pilot tests can be used for a period of 12 months, after which time forest managers will need to be reassessed according to the finalized procedure. We have also received expressions of interest to use the procedure in many more locations in 2018 once it is approved. Next slide. Testing business models has been an important part of our pilot testing of the procedure. Through the Forces project, many models were validated. Payments from downstream communities for verified water source protection, price premiums for timber and non-timber forest products, and the potential use of verified impacts to demonstrate results within watershed restoration funds. FSC is also testing the value to businesses of financially sponsoring verified positive impacts on ecosystem services. We are looking for private sector sponsorships of 3 sites: a company-managed forest concession in Indonesia, a state-owned forest in Vietnam, and a community forest in Peru. Next slide. The first site I would like to profile is PT Rata Timber, a company-managed forest concession in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. Following reduced impact logging approaches, the company has maintained the abundance of terrestrial, mammal species, and bird species while continuing to produce timber for export. These practices have also resulted in strong forest carbon benefits compared to regional baselines of forest carbon loss. These impacts, verified by FSC certifier SGS using the Ecosystem Services Procedure, are based on research carried out by Professor Kanehiro Kitayama at Kyoto University. The company is seeking financial support for its activities to support the protection, training, and monitoring activities that maintain these global benefits. Next slide. The Hoang Son Forest is located in a biodiversity hotspot in the Annamite mountain range in Vietnam's Ha Tinh province. In accordance with the Ecosystem Services Procedure, FSC certifier GFA certification verified that forest carbon stores are being maintained in the Hoang Son Forest. The forest is managed by the Hoang Son State Forestry Company, which holds an FSC certificate, but stopped extracting timber from the area in 2013 due to a national moratorium on logging in natural forests. Given its lack of income from timber sales, the company needs financial sponsorship to continue its activities together with local communities and authorities to manage, monitor, patrol, and protect this important forest. Next slide. Together with ADACOMP, a Peruvian NGO, Comunidad Nativa Belgica is an indigenous community managing a forest in the heart of the Peruvian Amazon. In addition to the forest's importance for biodiversity, it is also fundamental to satisfying the basic needs of the community, including the extraction of material for the construction of houses and the collection of firewood and medicinal plants. Using the Ecosystem Services Procedure, FSC Certifier Rainforest Alliance has verified that the protection and reduced impact logging approaches applied by the community maintains natural forest cover and faunal diversity in the forest. The community needs financial sponsorship to support the protection of high conservation value forests and for education and training. Next slide. While the maintenance of nature's benefits for society has costs, the value of these ecosystem services is traditionally ignored. FSC is working to strengthen incentives for their protection with FSC ecosystem services claims. We are looking for a small number of private sector sponsors who want to lead by example. A company providing a financial sponsorship to one of these sites will help demonstrate the viability of this new model. Some of the companies on this call are existing clients of Natural Capital Partners, and some have strong existing relationships with FSC. Depending on the interest that is expressed to us, we will develop a sponsorship arrangement tailored to the needs of the sponsor and the forest manager. Any interested organization should follow up directly with myself and Oliver. Once the ecosystem services procedure is approved and globally applicable, businesses will be able to use it to support investments within their own supply chains to reduce impacts and support the protection of ecosystem services with their suppliers. Next slide. FSC has wonderful marketing assets that sponsors could use to promote their sponsorships. FSC will work with sponsoring partners to develop a marketing approach that is tailored to the needs and interests of the sponsoring company. Thank you.
Chris, thank you for that overview. That offers some great insights. Now we've had a number of questions coming in already, which we'll go through in just a moment. So please keep those questions coming in. But firstly, would like to get your thoughts now that you've heard a bit more from Chris about ecosystem services with our final poll. And so that is appearing on the screen now. So our question is, how much value would FSC's new ecosystem services claim provide to your organization? And we would like you to choose from significant value, of some value, unlikely to add much value, or again, we're not yet sure. And I'll give you a few moments to answer that poll before closing it. And so it looks like while a number of you are undecided, that a good number of you, see some or significant value, which is fantastic. So thank you for that response. And with the final time remaining, we'd love to answer the questions that have come in. We've had quite a few questions, so I'm just going to choose 3 or 4 for us to answer in the time that we have available. And if you've got any outstanding questions, we'll be able to respond directly to those following the webinar. So the first question here looks like it relates to labels. And the question is, can we expect to soon see FSC ecosystem services labels on products at the grocery store?
Thank you, Oliver. Initially, we are focusing on promotion of impacts by forest managers and financial sponsors. We're still considering how to best present this information in association with products so that it is transparent, meaningful, and supports the FSC brand. So you will hopefully hear a lot of positive stories about positive impacts on FSC certified forests and rewards for those forest managers before you will see the label on store shelves.
Thank you, Chris. And I could see there was a sort of follow-up question there, which was when are the promoting and labeling procedures going to be defined? Do you have a timeline yet for that?
Thank you, Oliver. We don't have a timeline. We're working on it now. So the procedure we hope will be approved in this month and available for global application very soon thereafter. But the promotion and labeling is something that we're still developing a strategy for. So in the short term, but not immediately available.
Thank you. So the next question we have here is, It relates to the financial sponsorship, and the question is, could you please explain why financial sponsorship is important to helping maintain the positive ecosystem services impacts you have had on your forest?
Thank you, Oliver. I think that question is probably best answered by one of the forest managers or their representatives. Due to language and connectivity issues, we don't have the ability to ask all of them to respond to that question today. But my colleague T. Quayang Vu from Vietnam would be able to answer that question on behalf of the Hoang Son State Forestry Company, if you could unmute her.
Hello, here's Quang from Vietnam. Answer that question, we can say that for the case of Vietnam, the Hương Sơn model is very important to get financial support for that ecosystem services protection. Hương Sơn got the carbon claim, and with the current situation in that area, the managers are not allowed to harvest the timber in their forests, and in order to protect the forest, to conserve carbon and also biodiversity there, is very important to get some financial support to do the protection work, conservation work, and also monitoring the impact, positive impact of that ecosystem services protection. Hello. Hello?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response. So the next question we have here is, will the ecosystem services procedure require that FSC certified managers change the way they are managing their forests?
Thank you, Oliver. The answer to that question is it depends. The procedure gives forest managers a tool to demonstrate impact. If their management activities already achieve this impact, then there is no need for change. If the desired impact is not achieved or is perhaps not as strong as hoped, this provides forest managers with insights to adapt their management approach. So as I say, it all depends on the circumstance and how effective the current practices are at achieving those impacts.
Thank you, Chris. And then a question here around training for the auditors. So is there Chris, are you planning on sort of rolling out a training program for auditors about sort of the evaluation of these ecosystem services?
Yes, thank you, Oliver. We are right now designing a training program with three audiences in mind. Within our FSC network to support our FSC staff globally so they can in turn provide support to others. For the forest managers in using the ecosystem services procedure, and for the certification bodies to assess against it. So there will be generic trainings that are developed for those purposes. In addition to that, I showed in an earlier slide the areas where we've had expressions of interest to be the first generation of users of this approved ecosystem services procedure. And in that case, we will be working quite closely with the first few forest managers to apply this tool to visit the sites and give them concrete support as we work with them as the first movers in this new area.
Thank you, Chris. And then a question here about sort of the role of FSC. So the question is, does FSC plan to play an intermediary role between forest managers and sponsors, helping forest managers find financial rewards for verified ecosystem services impacts?
Thank you, Oliver. We're playing a very active role right now, as you can see, in the early days to help connect forest managers with sponsors and rewards for the impacts they've demonstrated. But that is not our intended model moving forward. We anticipate that once these, the first movers have come, the first generation of users, that we expect forest managers and sponsors to make their own arrangements, and that the main role of FSC is to provide the value of FSC trademark use to promote those impacts and the sponsorships. Having said that, for the short term, we are considering innovative ways to support and to fold sponsorship into some kind of new online marketplace. So that's a possibility we're exploring for the future. But in the short term, once we pass through this initial testing phase, we'll be expecting and hoping that forest managers and sponsors can come to their own arrangements.
Thank you. And then, Chris, a question here around sort of scale and scaling up. And so have you given sort of any thought to how this ecosystem services standard could scale up, and how what sort of proportion of the portfolio of FSC forests would it be applicable to?
Thank you, Oliver. What we found through the Forces project is that markets for ecosystem services, there's no one single market. It's very broad term that captures a wide range of circumstances and models. And we found that business models were very different too. So on a lot of the pilot tests, most of the pilot tests sites that we've been working with have evolved either a very different or slightly different business model. So there isn't really a one size fits all. So the potential use of these new tools really depends on context, and the precise use depends on context. So I think that broadly speaking, the potential is great for this to apply to a broad swath of FSC certified forests, but the model won't be the same. And so we're looking, some of the models are more inherently scalable than others. So I mentioned earlier in my presentation, one of the models is a local downstream community paying an upstream community for the protection of water sources. And this is the Charnawati site in Dolaka district in Nepal, working with ANSAB, our partner in the Forces project. That's a very local model and a very valuable one, I think. But it's not going to be applied, at a globally significant scale as one single model. On the other hand, this year we're planning on testing the application of the procedure together with a reduced impact logging for carbon methodology developed by the Nature Conservancy in the Congo Basin, and exploring how that contributes to private sector climate mitigation within national REDD+ strategies to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So that is a model that is very scalable, and we're hoping that this model that we're exploring now through financial sponsorship can also be scalable if we can work with some partner companies to look within their supply chains and figure out how this is a tool that can provide them value in tracking reduced impact within their supply chains. For example, we're within an insetting approach where companies are willing to invest and interested to invest in positive impacts within their supply chain. So that's something that I think in the age of zero deforestation commitments and climate commitments and sustainable development goal contributions is potentially quite scalable as well.
Fantastic, Chris. Well, it's great to hear about that potential, and I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. So I'm going to end the webinar, and I'd just like to thank you all once again for attending and asking those questions, and a big thank you to Chris for sharing this opportunity. And as Chris mentioned, if you'd like to find out more information, then please feel free to contact myself or Chris, and you'll see our contact email addresses up on screen now. This webinar recording will be available on our website and will be sent to everyone shortly, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues. Thanks again and goodbye.